Let's talk about Sudan. The Rapid Support Forces are increasing attacks against the Sudanese people in multiple parts that they're trying to take over. But the conflict in Sudan and the current tensions didn't start with the escalation of the Rapid Support Forces in 2023. As a matter of fact, the same Rapid Support Forces were part of the forces of the Sudanese state up until the previous leader of Sudan went to the UAE and the Sudanese government was taken over by a new leadership. Now, however, we're not just talking about a movement that is primarily led by motives of the Sudanese people, but rather a movement that is heavily backed by foreign powers and for various reasons. Before that, let's go through a little bit of background. Sudan was previously part of the Egyptian kingdom up until the Egyptian Revolution in 1953, where Egypt declared that it no longer wants to have this relation with Sudan, and then Sudan had its independence and it was officially recognized in 1956. Later on, there was another split, now this time between North Sudan and South Sudan following a 2-decade war. South Sudan became independent now with the same leader who was there actually before they had their independence and when they were still under the one Sudanese state. Okay. We had a previous Sudan, another Sudan, and then a new Sudan and a South Sudan. Things starting to get complicating slightly, and there's a reason for that. It's not coming out of nowhere. Sudan is a country with real, genuinely massive diversity. I mean, we're talking about 500 ethnic groups and over 400 languages. Of course, not all of them are equal in terms of the size, but still, when you talk about 500 ethnic groups and 400 languages, that's huge. Of course, the majority are Sudanese Arabs, but still, we have a lot of other groups inside of Sudan. For example, Fur, Beja, Nuba, Masalit and Zaghawa and Nubians as well, who have a connection with Egypt too. So we have a lot of diversity in that area. And again, the way these countries are shaped and the way they formed into nation states, in many cases didn't take into account the ethnic backgrounds of these locations, similar to some of the North African nations. For example, when some of these lines were drawn in the middle of the desert, when you had tribes that lived on both sides, likewise with other countries in Asia too, and in other parts of the world as well. So it's quite a complex matter when it comes to the ethnicities and the diversity. Moving on to now, what's the map looking like in terms of power control, especially in Sudan? We're not talking about South Sudan now. This is the map. The color here indicates the control of the central Sudanese government. The one here is the Rapid Support Forces. Who are the Rapid Support Forces? Well, again, they were part of the Sudanese government, but then later they flipped against the central government inside of Sudan, backed heavily by multiple countries and multiple sides abroad, primarily the UAE. Now, we have a couple of people in this image over here. One of them is, of course, the leader of the UAE MBZ, Mohammed bin Zayed. We have a man here called Khalifa Haftar too. That's Hamidti, the man who is leading the Rapid Support Forces. And this man is called Said Beni, a man who is leading a Somalian militia. Now, Said Deni, excuse me. What does the Libyan side, what does the UAE side have to do with all of this? And how are they supporting the rapid support forces, and for what reasons exactly? Well, firstly, the UAE, they have a very good relation with the previous Sudanese leader, Omar al-Bashir. As a matter of fact, he is reportedly in the UAE. Now, what does that matter in relation to today, and why do they have this soft spot for the RSF, the Rapid Support Force? Well, the RSF, before they had this internal problem with the new government inside of Sudan, they had supported the Saudi UAE backed mass war against Yemen that included starvation, massacres, and total destruction. RSF reportedly voluntarily went to Yemen and supported with tens of thousands of troops. Therefore, they have a good relationship with the UAE. And now the UAE is capitalizing on that previous relationship. However, the notion that some people say they went and voluntarily did that could be slightly misleading, because the UAE could have had an interest in that area from a very long time ago, and not necessarily as a gesture of goodwill or as if they're responding to the support of the RSF in Yemen against Ansarullah or the Houthis, and they later withdrew from that area in 2019. So we have a history here of this relationship. Why? What's happening in Sudan? Well, Sudan has a lot of reserves of gold. There's a lot of illegal mining happening with gold, and the UAE is very interested in that. But if we go back to the image over here, especially when we talk about Khalifa Haftar is a CIA asset who was based in the United States during the Gaddafi era, and with the collapse of the Gaddafi government at the time, he went back to Libya, not to support building the country, but to play the role of the asset, which is instill division. And now we have a de facto government that we've had for a very long time now in the eastern part of Libya, in particular Benghazi and the surrounding areas. And this man has a lot of blood on his hands. Of course, he is tied with the UAE directly, and he is one of the main supporters of Hamidti. Why? Well, because of the proximity and the geographical relative closeness between Libya and Sudan. As a matter of fact, if we look at it on one of the maps here that we'll try and get in a sec, we'll see exactly how close they are and how much they support them. Let's have a look at one of these maps over here. Okay, so that's Libya, that's the Kufra airport, and that is Sudan. The power, well, most of the areas under the control of the RSF are again in this area over here, clearly the eastern part or northeastern part, which happen to be, of course, the borders of Libya. We have support, direct support coming from the UAE to some of the Somali militias, but also Libya as well, primarily Libya, to the Kufra airport, that are going directly to the support of the RSF in mostly the Darfur area in the eastern part of Sudan. And in the meantime, of course, they're killing a lot of people. They are committing huge massacres. There is huge suffering as the population. And as a matter of fact, recently there was a United Nations estimate that 3.2 million Sudanese children under the age of 5 will face acute malnutrition in 2025. Over 700,000 children in conflict-torn Sudan will likely suffer from severe acute malnutrition, says spokesman. We're talking about a huge suffering of the people, with deliberate killing that many directly said were ethnic cleansing too. Some of them blame the RSF of also committing mass rapes against certain populations as well, especially in the areas that they want to have under their control. So we are facing a situation here with a couple of players who undeniably had some sort of involvement in other areas too, other areas in other Arab countries primarily, who are trying to benefit from the conflict. But we're not just talking about this financial support. In many cases, we're talking about actual people going to fight and kill for these causes. So we have, for example, the UAE with this support. We have some of the Somalian militias with Libyan support as well. There were reports that the RSF also got help from Kenya previously. Russia too, who reportedly changed its support for them since, well, recently, 2024 and 2025. And as a matter of fact, even the United States is criticizing what the RSF is doing. As a matter of fact, the United States called it outright a genocide, a determined genocide in Sudan, and they were calling for imposing accountability measures. This was released by the United States government, criticizing their attacks. RSF and RSF-aligned militias have continued direct attacks against civilians and systematically murdered men and boys, even infants, on an ethnic basis. Again, there are also claims of Arab supremacy in certain areas because they're killing other tribes and other ethnic groups, these RSF, of course. Then particularly because at the end of the day, the other government, they had everyone under their sovereignty, under their control generally. But what caught my attention in this description here, not of course to deny or say that the United States all of a sudden is caring for these people, but to rather highlight the level of hypocrisy and double standards with the United States administration, criticizing what the RSF are doing when they haven't even called what their ally Israel is doing in Gaza not only a genocide but even ethnic cleansing. They always give Israel excuses to the attacks that are happening inside of the Gaza Strip, but they're having these statements here. How real are the, well, not the substance, but how genuine is the United States in relation to this conflict? Well, the United States is the same United States, well, the administration at least, who supported Khalifa Haftar and met with him. As a matter of fact, again, this man is a confirmed CIA asset from the era of Muammar Gaddafi, and now he is fully supported and backed by not only the United States but other countries too. They will probably criticize here and there, but really and truly they gave him legitimacy, they gave him the power, they enabled him to go back there and play this role of dividing this country that is now extending to Sudan too. Why? Because they also want weak African nations with this foreign involvement. That doesn't take away from the fact that there were internal issues happening for a very long time in Sudan. But what we have now is a direct campaign by a movement inside of Sudan that is backed by countries with a rich history in crimes against humanity in other countries too, doing so not only for financial purposes and not only for the gold reserves and not only for financial gain, but also for a greater project to keep African nations destabilized, weak, war-torn, and facing famine.